everybody, it's James Lindsay. This is New Discourses Bullets. This is a short podcast where I give you a bullet point type summary of one topic from woke Marxism that we need to know so we can beat it. And today I want to talk about anti-communist education. If I had to put high on if I had to make a priority list of things that we should be doing, we should be pushing for, I know we're not going to get it in a lot of places, but there are a lot of states where this would be able to be happening. We need, in the long run, and as soon as possible, robust anti-communist education in this country and throughout the West. We have fair to middle in, at least, as we say here in the South, anti-fascist education, or at least anti-Nazi education. We need anti-communist education. We need to teach the true history of communism, which includes all of its atrocities. It is not okay that I go and give public talks all around this country, and I ask audiences all around this country, how many of you can name the Holodomor? How many of you can name that? Virtually nobody raises their hand. How many of you can name the killing fields? Virtually nobody raises their hand. How many of you know what the Great Leap Forward was? How about year zero? Nobody raises. It's like 5, 10 people tops out of hundreds in the audience have heard of these. Who knows who Trofim Lysenko is? Nobody. These things should actually be household knowledge in a country that doesn't want to end up as a communist shithole. They must be. So we need to teach the atrocities and the history and the true facts of communism. We should teach how to identify communist theory in essence, not just by name. Did you know that equity is socialism? They use a different word for it, but you should be able to identify that. You should be able to identify that it's an administered political economy in which shares are adjusted so that citizens are made equal, and recognize that that's socialism, but that's also equity. It's the same thing. It's just rebranded. You should be able to recognize what the goals of communism are, to transform the world and transform man so that he's more fully human according to the definitions of what makes man human, which is that he's social, fully social, as in socialist. These are the kinds of things that people should be learning to be able to recognize as children so they can avoid falling into these traps like, oh, we need an inclusive and belonging environment and we just want to have equity where everybody feels like they have access. People who know what communism looks like victims of communism who escaped to the United States have been screaming about for years, see this stuff and recognize it immediately. We should be teaching robust anti-communist education in this country, and I would say it's a very high priority item, both for the future national security of this country and for the protection of our children, but also because it's, well, first of all, an important historical topic, but also because I have a series of iron laws of woke behavior that tell you when something is how something is working within wokery. One of those very famously, the most famous one is the iron law of woke projection. The woke always project. They confess by projecting. They tell you what they're doing. They accuse their enemies of doing what they're doing. It's constant. It makes some of the things they write very scary when you realize that they're saying the Republicans want to end democracy. Well, okay, there you go. Iron law of woke projection. They want to end democracy, right? Of course. They want to have their special so-called proletarian or sustainable or whatever democracy, inclusive democracy, different names, different things. They want to have one that's liberating democracy. They want to control the elements of society that they don't want. They don't count in a democratic society. The people aren't really people. So they project. But then there's the iron law of woke corruption. Usually where you find woke, you're going to find corruption. That's usually how it makes its way in the door, as a matter of fact. And somebody is probably grifting off of this garbage because it's one of the most griftable systems in the universe. And that's kind of what actually keeps it going. A lot of people go along with woke because they can make a lot of money grifting off of it. So you can usually find, if you see woke happening, there's probably corruption happening too. But the third one, and is the one that's relevant here, is the iron law of woke overreaction. The woke will overreact when you're over the target. You've probably heard the saying. You take the most flack when you're over the target. The woke can't help but flip out if you point out something very important to their agendas. And in this case, that happened. In fact, it's kind of happened twice already, just in the past few weeks. Me recording this in the middle of March 2023 in Virginia. Two different stories. I actually was looking up just one to make sure I had the details right before I sat down to record this, and I found out there were two. As it turns out, two things have happened just this in the past few weeks, so not quite this month. At the end of February 23 and the middle of March 23, the Virginia Democrats rejected a anti-communist educational curriculum in the state of Virginia. Virginia Democrats rejected a bill that would have required schools to teach about the dangers and victims of communism, after the state's largest teachers union argued that it would offend Asian Americans or subject them to racist abuse. Anti-Asian sentiment. Why? Because some of the worst communist atrocities happened in countries like China and Vietnam and Korea, North Korea specifically, and Cambodia, including that Year Zero killing fields thing where the Cambodian Khmer Rouge regime under Pol Pot murdered about 25% of its population in 3 years because their communist utopia wasn't manifesting. If you don't know how horrible that one is, you should look that up. You should look up the Cambodian genocide, the killing fields. I mean, they were murdering people for wearing glasses in case they might be intellectuals, because intellectuals might be able to pick apart the communism, you see. So anybody who wore glasses might be smart, so they were murdering them. They murdered them with bullets. They murdered them by strapping them to mattresses and electrifying them, so literally the equivalent of an electric chair, but as a mattress. They had trees designated in different parts of Cambodia where they swung babies, by their feet and smashed their heads against the trees to kill them, because it wasn't enough to pull up the grass. You have to pull out the roots too. That was the logic. It was a really nasty genocide the communists pulled. But you see, teaching that would teach children, apparently, according to the Virginia Democrats, that Asian people can be mean when they're communists, and therefore there might be anti-Asian sentiment as a result. Now, of course, that accusation of anti-racist or anti-Asian racism is nonsense. It's just BS. It has traction with leftists, so they use it. It's CRT nonsense. It's not really why they don't. That's not the real reason. That is P.S. Communists lie. That's not the real reason they don't want people taught communism. They don't want to teach the history, the victims, and the atrocities of communism, because then people would be able to recognize that what they're doing is communism, and they would say no. They would know that this ends in killing fields or a Holodomor, which is a mass starvation that happened, a mass famine that took place in Ukraine under Stalin. Maybe 3 million, maybe 8 million, something like this, Ukrainians starved. Those stories are horrific. They don't want these stories told. They don't want people to know. They don't want the stories of survivors of communism to be told either. We know that. How do we know that? Virginia Teachers Union, just a whole 2 weeks later, Virginia Teachers Union pushes Democrats to end Victims of Communism Day. They don't want the victims of communism to have their stories told. What does this tell us? It tells us, by application of the iron law of woke overreaction, and the fact that they don't want it, and the fact that they don't want it for obviously nonsensical reasons, that we must do it. That it's the calls I've been making for a couple of years now at least, that our education system must start to incorporate everywhere that it will anti-communist education. What does anti-communist education look like? It looks like teaching the history of communism, telling the stories of victims of communism, telling the truth about communism, and teaching people enough about what communism thinks in essence, not just in specific, so that people learn to recognize it, even if it uses different words. In fact, teaching that it misuses words in that way is a useful thing to do. Okay? And so they don't want that taught. So the iron law of woke overreaction tells us we must do this. We must teach this. What it tells us is all those calls I made were correct. This is something that we should be teaching. We should be teaching anti-communism for a large number of reasons. We should protect our future population. We should inoculate our kids against it. But we also see, according to the Virginia Democrats, with these two decisions, centered in the teachers' unions, how about that? The Virginia Education Association is the one driving this. They don't want education about communism. Why would that be? What are they trying to hide? Why wouldn't they want our children to learn about one of the biggest things that happened in the 20th century, causing upwards of 100 million deaths, something that they are weirdly increasingly interested in now under the schools that we now also know are teaching Marxified education, critical consciousness through what's called critical Marxism and critical pedagogy. It's all the same critical. They tell you it's the same critical. Allison Bailey, I read a podcast, one of these episodes of this podcast was about Allison Bailey distinguishing between critical thinking and critical pedagogy, which she said is rooted in neo-Marxist power analysis. Critical pedagogy or critical Marxist education is rooted in neo-Marxist power analysis. Marxist. It's not rooted in understanding the world correctly. And we know this to be the case. And so they don't want it taught. So I again urge you, very simple message. Every state in this country that has the political capital to do so, or the political opportunity to do so, should be pushing for robust anti-communist education as soon as possible. Get it into the curriculum, get the curriculum put together, get it into schools. Homeschoolers networks should be producing this curriculum for other homeschoolers and for anybody to be able to pick up. People ask me all the time, James, you say we need anti-communist homeschool modules and, general education for people to pick up and share with their kids. Why don't you make it? Because I can barely talk to adults. Listen to me. I can't talk to kids. I can't make educational curriculum on a second grade level that's appropriate. That's going to be somebody else's tasks. I know my limitations. But people should be making this robust anti-communist curriculum that could be distributed to parents who are homeschooling, parents who are not homeschooling formally but know their kids are in danger and want to do it in their spare time anyway and be able to pick it up. But in particular, it needs to be driven into the schools. I think it's a matter of top importance to protecting our children, to fixing our schools, and to actually national security and the future of this country. If we don't want to live in a communist disaster area, we need robust anti-communist education. And the Virginia Democrats have proven this to us by absolutely refusing it on absolutely ridiculous pretenses.